So we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Kim Cullen, and I'm a program manager at the Children's Cabinet. Welcome to our third webinar in our summer series. If you haven't heard about the Children's Cabinet, we are a nonprofit that has been in Nevada since 1985. Our mission is to keep children safe and families together. And one of the programs that we run is supporting businesses throughout the state to examine their family-friendly policies and the benefits to help support working parents. We really hope you're enjoying this series as much as we are. Before we begin, I would like to go over just a few housekeeping items. We are recording this webinar, so please stay on mute during the presentation. You can use the chat function to ask questions, and we will answer them at the end if there's time. The first two webinars in this series have been exploring how important childcare is to the workforce of today and tomorrow. Parents struggle to concentrate at work or even make it to work when their children are not safe and cared for. This has significant economic impacts at the personal, business, state, and federal levels. If you missed either one of the first two webinars, you can access the recording at childrenscabinet.org/businesses, and we'll pop that in the chat for you. So we also know that demand is high for childcare and supply is low. So today we'll explore why childcare is not more readily available and why the industry does not follow normal rules of supply and demand. Evelyn Knight is our expert for this topic. Evelyn is a two-time TEDx speaker who specializes in empowering the childcare profession. She is a child care center owner who understands what it takes to have a successful childcare business that puts the children first. Evelyn is passionate about elevating the ECE field and is leading the charge in the ECE revolution. Welcome, Evelyn. I'm so excited to learn more about the business of childcare.
Thank you, Kim. So I'm just going to get right to it and jump into my slides. That way we have plenty of time for discussion. I do love discussion. I can tell you I am doing these webinars a couple times every week throughout the US, but I am a Nevada native. So I'm thrilled to be able to do this for Nevada as well. And I love the discussion. It gets lonely on this side, so I would love questions. Participation is awesome, and definitely pick my brain. I am a child care center owner. I have owned programs for a little over 20 years, so I have a lot of industry experience. I've actually also worked every position in a child care center, from the cook to an infant teacher, so I really know this industry well. And for those of you who don't, feel free to pick my brain. I'm more than happy to share why this doesn't work. A little bit more about me also. I not only own childcare centers, I own actually a total of 4 companies. But the one that brings me to doing presentations like this around the country and that has gotten me onto TEDx stages is my company, Childcare Business Professionals. And that company really just exists to help empower childcare center owners find success while keeping the children first. And what we're talking about today is part of the reason I created that company. I got to the point as an owner myself where struggling to survive was really becoming a huge hurdle for me. And so I found other ways by studying other companies. My husband was also a business owner and managed a lot of big companies. And it was actually, I did lose my husband, but right about the time when I figured what was going on, I started the second company to really figure out, how are we going to sustain? And when I figured this out, how am I going to make it contagious so other companies and childcare centers can be successful and keep going? So it's a huge passion of mine. I'm an advocate and really trying to find a way to help this industry survive. And it is down to that big of a hurdle at this point. Is we're literally looking at survival at this point. As a childcare center owner who talks to owners all over the country every day, I can tell you we are in survival mode. If you look at the statistics, they are very scary for us. 3.2 million children in the United States are estimated to lose their care in 2024. And an estimated 70,000 children or 70,000 childcare centers have already closed or will be closing in 2024. Now in Nevada, we're greatly affected. We're seeing costs for childcare rising, where it's almost taking 20% of the average family's household income. I mean, just imagine that. 20% of the average household income is going to paying for childcare. And 74% of children in the state of Nevada already do not have access to the quality care and education that they deserve. And that is for children under 5 years old. All children deserve the best quality care and education. But because of what we're facing in this industry, childcare is becoming a desert. It's becoming a very hard industry to survive in. And so what we're seeing is less and less options for families. So why does this matter to you? Why should you even care? This problem is it is already impacting the workforce and the future of Nevada. It's not just Nevada though, it is our entire country that we're looking at. But for us as Nevadans, this is what we really care about, right? We want to have a healthy workforce. I'm an employer. I understand how hard it is right now to employ. And just recruiting alone is so difficult. Right now, this is definitely an employer's market or the employee's market. And as an employer, sometimes it can be very, very hard to attract and retain employees. The other issue that we're really seeing become very prevalent in the United States right now is that parents are actually opting out of the workforce to stay home. And it's really due to the rising cost of childcare, the inability to find childcare or the rising costs. Because I have a national voice and I have a podcast, I get messages daily. And it's from caregivers and parents who are reaching out to me saying, help, what do I do? I just got a parent actually in the Gardnerville, Carson City area reach out to me yesterday. They're saying, I just found out my provider is closing their doors at the end of this month. They just informed me today that I do not have care as of August 1st. What do? I don't know how I'm going to get to work. Do you have any recommendations? Do you know somebody who's opening a center there? I've been asked to take over and purchase this place so that they still have a place to take their child. These are the kind of conversations I'm having every single day. So parents are also somewhat being blindsided by suddenly not having care because their childcare center just suddenly closed down unexpectedly. So that is a huge problem for the workforce. And so we are seeing a lot of parents, mothers and fathers both, or even grandparents who are stepping in and becoming stay-at-home parents in order to solve the problem. I know for me as an employer, that is scary because the estimates that I've seen from the NAEYC, which is the National Association of Education for Young Children, they're estimating that we can lose 40% of the workforce. That is huge. If enough parents leave to stay home with their children. And that means it is going to be even harder for us to hire, more competitive. And as it gets more competitive, it gets more expensive for us as employers. And that is just detrimental to so many businesses. And as mentioned, I know in other series that you guys have heard in this series, well cared for children means parents can be present at work. They are more productive and they have more stable attendance. This parent that called me yesterday and was desperate about what they were going to do. What happens if August 1st, which is just next week, comes along and they don't have care? That's going to become an attendance issue. That is going to lead to them being distracted. If they have to find emergency care that isn't the best quality, how focused are they going to be at work? And this is just one example of what is becoming an epidemic in our state. A strong economy does rely on a robust workforce. It becomes really difficult for us when it is so competitive out there that we're literally fighting for employees. And the other thing that isn't talked about nearly enough, I don't think, is that children represent the future workforce for us. The executive brain functions that produce good employees are being formed in the first 5 years of life. There was a study done by Forbes magazine a few years ago, and they were asking Fortune 500 companies, what is the most important thing for you in an employee? And surprisingly, what they listed wasn't education. It really wasn't the things that you find on a resume. It was the executive brain functioning skills. It was, can they show up for work on time? Are they good problem solvers? Do they have good reasoning skills? Are they team players? And all of those traits are formed in the first 5 years of life. You as an adult, each one of us can look at some of the things that we struggle with the most. I know for me, I struggle with time management. I have to have so many hacks in my life because I struggle with time management. That was actually formed for me in the first 5 years of my life. Had I been to a very healthy preschool program that helped me learn, I would have established a natural cadence for time management that I do not have now in my adult life, which means I've had to learn to adapt. Now imagine a workforce that is brought up to have really strong executive brain functions. Imagine how different Nevada would be if we really focused on that. In as little as 15 years, we could see a huge difference in the entire workforce, their responsibility, their ability to bounce back from stress. That is all formed in the first 5 years of life. So it is vitally important for our future that we're making sure these young children are in really healthy environments, because the healthier their preschool experience is and these early years, the healthier workforce we're going to have in the future. So let's talk about the supply chain dilemma. Why is it that childcare has such a hard time with regulating the supply chain? Well, first and foremost, we're caring for humans. It surprises me how often I have to say this. Children are little humans. This is not an industry that we can really just automate. They need emotional support. They need love. They need all of the things. And these are not things that you can literally just create a machine to take care of. On top of that, we're very heavily regulated. Regulation constraints makes it extremely hard for us to expand, to produce more spots, and it makes it very, very expensive. It costs us so much money that it causes our operational expenses to go up. And I'll give you an example. And by the way, when I do these, I will be hopping on and off my screen all the time because I like to talk to you so you can see me and we can really talk through this instead of just staring at a PowerPoint. But I want to tell you guys about something I'm going through right now. As a child care center owner, my center is licensed for 130 children. And I just had my licensing visit this couple weeks ago. Well, in my licensing visit, they basically cited me for a couple things. There's a chip in the stucco on my building. And so now I have to get the stucco redone and the entire building repainted. There's also a small tear in my turf on my playground. So now I have to replace the entire playground's turf. I just received quotes for these 2 projects will cost me almost $40,000. I want you to think about that. To continue with my licensing, which by the way, they gave me a 30-day turnaround time, I have to put out $40,000 to maintain these 2 things. And it's actually not even that bad. If you guys saw it, you would just be shocked. Literally, the hole in my stucco is maybe 1 inch by 1 inch. But because of the nature of it, now I'm going to have to get that patch. I'm going to have to get that whole wall painted. And then same thing with my turf. It's not that big a deal, but I have to get the whole thing replaced now. And the best quotes I've gotten are $40,000. So imagine those financial constraints. Those are things that we deal with every day, all the time. And it changes. And I'm going to go over more examples like that so you guys can understand the hurdles that we face. Another big hurdle is limited enrollment capacity. We only have so much space. We can only take so much children. And then affordability issues. Because my overhead is so high, prices that I have to charge just to break even make it very hard on parents to be able to afford care. I told you earlier, it's almost 20% of the average Nevadan's household income as it is. And that's before we raise rates, right? And every day things are getting more expensive, and more expensive. So it becomes a huge issue. Staffing shortages are a big deal. I teach an entire series for childcare center owners on creative recruiting. We have had to become very creative because we're competing with companies that can pay double what we pay. It's already hard enough as it is. And now we're competing with people who literally can pay double. So now we have to find very creative ways to attract people in to come work for us and to retain them. And when I say we're creative, I mean really creative. I mean, I'm thinking of things outside the box. I literally went to a local supermarket chain and I asked them, is there any way I can get some kind of stipend donation for groceries? And they said yes. And so basically, what we do at my childcare program is my son helps me run the program. He goes once a week to the warehouse. They give us a bunch of groceries. We take them to our staff. We don't know what we're getting, but it helps with the cost of their groceries, right? And these are the kind of creative things that I've had to come up with in order to retain staff. And that's not the only one. There's quite a few. But when my staff can literally go down the street and make double what I'm paying them, I have to find other ways to keep them happy. And I would love to be able to pay my staff more. I think every owner in the state of Nevada would love to pay their early childhood staff more, but we just can't. Our hands are tied. I'm already charging my parents as much as they can possibly afford, and I'm already at my max. So it really does become just this struggle to figure out what are we going to do. Compliance and training can also become an issue. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that coming up here, but it's another big issue on the type of training costs my staff has to go through, that I have to go through, the compliance issues. And then the other issue that we have that I have to say, again, I was very concerned about is since COVID, we have become very subsidy dependent. When all of the funding came down, this is something that really concerned me. And I am a business coach for a lot of childcare centers. And I'll be honest, I recommended to many of them, do not take the funding. And if you do, be very careful. The reason this is because I was really concerned about the sustainability of our businesses as a business person. If I'm suddenly getting these huge cash injections into my business, and I know they're only going to last 2 years, what am I going to do when they're gone? That was a major fear of mine. And I can tell you right now, we are seeing that come to fruition. That is part of the reason why we're seeing this massive amount of childcare centers close. And we are seeing it here in Nevada. I get calls at least once a week from owners asking me to take over their program. I do like to acquire programs, so I'm constantly getting calls from owners. Hey, can you take over my preschool? And the problem with that is that I have to look at their books. And many of them are so unrealistic about what their business valuation is. They have no idea. So they're pretty much losing their business. And so we've become very subsidy dependent, which is really difficult. The other thing that makes it hard is delays in payment. My center is part of the Nevada Ready program and also the Children's Cabinet. The problem for both Nevada Ready and Children's Cabinet is that they are reliant on the Department of Education to get their funding. If the Department of Education is late, we get paid late. I know with one of my subsidy payments, I had to wait up to 5 months. 5 months. And that was accounting for 20 spots in my childcare program. So becoming subsidy dependent like that, if you don't have a good safety net in place and your cash flow is low, can be a very dangerous thing for this industry. And we are seeing a lot of childcare centers going out of business basically because they cannot sustain these long delays in the payments that we receive. So let's talk a little bit more about heavy regulation. On the left side, I'm really just talking about like, what are normal regulations? Well, just to help you understand, why is it that we are so limited on the amount of children? And this is probably the biggest issue with why we do not follow normal supply chain models. Ratios affect us greatly. For example, for my infant room, I can have one teacher to every 4 babies, right? And in my 3-year-olds, it's a little bit better. It's 1 teacher to 10, which is a good. The issue actually comes in what are called group sizes. And this is what many people don't understand. We're also regulated by the concept of a group size. The concept of a group size means how many babies or children are you allowed in the classroom? Now, for example, my infant room is licensed for 21 infants, but Nevada's group size is 8. So that means I cannot have more than 8 infants in that classroom, right? The other thing is I have opted to be a high quality program. And so I do go through accreditation. Well, an accreditation recommends that you do not have more than 8 babies. And to be completely honest, the babies deserve that. Having 21 babies in one room is obnoxious and is not okay. Every baby deserves the best care possible. Every 3-year-old, 4-year-old, it doesn't matter. They deserve the best. So while, yes, these statutes make it hard for us to turn higher profits, I also think they are extremely necessary. And even the ones like, for me, a lot of times I will follow NAEYC standards, which are just the highest quality standards, but they should be regulation because it's what the children deserve. It really is. And I can tell you as a business person and an owner, they have to come first. They do. They are humans and they have to come first. So these are things that I always have to mention. I agree with 100%. And we should not have more than 8 babies in a room, even if the room is licensed for 21. So just an example of where our constraints come in. For my, I think my most drastic room is my 2-year-old classroom, which was licensed for 33 children at one point, but I can only take 16. So what I did in that room was I actually had a wall built to separate and turn it into 2 rooms. And the way it turned out is now I just take 12 on one side and 12 on the other. Now, the cost of that, though, because of other regulations, I had to rewrite my fire, the exits and some of my sprinklers. And that project cost me over $50,000. But it was worth it in the end because now at least I am taking 24 children. So in the long run, I will make more of a profit on that. Safety standards. Safety standards can be very stringent and they significantly raise the cost of our operations. I told you a little bit earlier on, I literally have a bill to replace my turf. That bill is about $24,000 just to replace my turf. That is a safety issue that they see. And again, these are necessary things. Sometimes they, like, for me to replace my turf, I was a little bit like, really, the whole thing? I can't just patch it? But at the same time, it is what's best for the children. So stringent regulations make things very expensive. The other thing that stringent regulations have done, however, is they've made our liability insurance costs skyrocket. Absolutely skyrocket. I have seen I just actually yesterday got my new estimate on this year's liability and auto insurance for my childcare center. And it is going up 120% from this time in 2021 to today. It has gone up 120%. It is crazy. So a lot of the safety standards have to do with that. And they look at it from a nationwide perspective, but it makes it very, very different. Now, the other thing that we really, really struggle with, And this is something I'm experiencing currently again, is contradictory regulations. Child care centers, and depending on what county and city you're in, you can deal with at least 5 different regulating bodies. And that can be very hard. And so here I want to tell you a little bit of a story of something that I'm dealing with right now. So at my childcare center here, I have my back doors. Every single one of my classrooms has a back door. Now, childcare licensing comes into my center and says these doors have to be locked at all times because it's a safety issue if a 2-year-old decides to open a door and get out. That is a huge safety issue. Well, then the fire marshal comes in and says, oh, no, these doors have to remain unlocked at all times because the children have to be able to get out. And so I call my licensing rep and I say, hey, fire marshal is telling me the doors have to be unlocked. She's like, sorry, you have to leave them locked. Call the fire marshal. They're telling me I have to keep these doors locked. She's like, nope, fire hazard. And you will get fined every day that you lock those doors. So I get stuck between these regulating bodies. And this has happened to me several times with the Labor Commission, with childcare licensing. They don't communicate and they have contradictory regulations. And in this case, with my back doors, I'm literally having 2 different regulatory bodies tell me I'm going to get fined daily if I don't adhere. Yet if I adhere to one, I'm not adhering to another. Now, that was a fight I did end up taking on, and luckily the fire marshal ended up backing down on that one. But again, I'm in a new situation, which I'm just now looking at, where fire just came into my building. A couple of years ago, I had a fire marshal tell me to block out an exit and make changes to my building, basically, which we did. Now, this new fire marshal in town is telling us, nope, we needed to go back the old way. And so I am now hiring a contractor to come in and fix that. Now, that isn't part of the first deal I told you about with the stucco and the grass. This is a totally different deal that I get to hire a contractor for, and I'm currently getting estimates for. So when everything is said and done, the costs just keep rising and rising and rising. And a lot of this is these contradictions in what we're being told is okay and isn't. And it makes it very, very difficult to run a business, basically. So there's also local obstacles that can really come into play. My childcare center is on a special use permit. Thank God they signed up for 99 years because I've had different people who come into our city planning who've tried to revoke it, tried to change things. But there are a lot of like HOA regulations, zoning issues, and local ordinances that really affect us. Now, I added NDOT on there because of a recent experience that I've had. Now, at my childcare program, I currently have a wait list of 1,300 children. Yes, 1,300 children are on my wait list. So I've spent the last 2 years trying to find a location to build a new center so I could expand to accommodate at least 1/10 of those children. And I found some property, I put in a bid, and as thank God, I hired somebody to do an investigation to make sure I could build on the site before I closed escrow. Well, NDOT came back and basically told me that if I built on the site, I would have to pay to reconstruct the Highway 95 that goes through our town, and I would have to put a turn lane in. This was $1 million project that they were putting on my shoulders to build a childcare center. So I found a different location. And now my city comes to me and says, okay, the only way we're going to give you a city license is if you install gutters and sidewalks on the entire 2-mile street. For me to put a new childcare center on this specific new second lot, they wanted me to install gutters and sidewalks on the entire street. So these are the kind of issues that we go through all the time. And I've been through this type of issue now 4 different times with 4 different properties, just trying to open another location. That's it. And these are the kind of things that we are trying to overcome that don't even allow us to address demand. When you look at the supply chain, it's always about supply and demand, right? I can't even get to my demand because of all the roadblocks I'm constantly hitting between zoning issues, local ordinances, and even NDOT putting their 2 cents in. So that's where things get really difficult. And I would love to expand, but it's been fun. Even by reconstructing, like I told you, I split my 2-year-old classroom in 2 so that I could add more children. I've thought about doing the same to my infant room, but my city has basically told me I cannot increase my enrollment by 10%, even though childcare licensing is okay with it. And even though I have more than enough playground space and more than enough room in my building. So I'm pretty much stuck, and I can't even speak to the demand that I do have room because of all these ordinances that I'm constantly up against. So let's talk a little bit about the workforce obstacles. The obstacles that we deal with in the workforce can also be quite the challenge. If you look at childcare as a whole, which as a childcare business coach, this is one of the biggest things I have to overcome. Usually when I'm dealing with a childcare center that's going bankrupt, the first thing I look at is payroll. And statistically, and from my own experience, what I found is the average childcare center spends 70% of their income on payroll, despite the low wages. Just think about that. The average business should never spend more than 30% on payroll, but we're at a 70% margin. For me at my center, if I'm under 50%, I'm doing great. The best I've ever been able to do is 47%. That's the best and I have a pretty healthy business. And in the business world, that is unheard of. It really is. So the average is 70%. So imagine trying to operate a business on a 30% margin. That's what most childcare centers are doing. The normal profit for a childcare center is usually about 1%. A good program would be considered 5% profit. So when I'm looking at P&Ls and balance sheets, I'm looking anything over 5% is excellent in this industry. So it's really, really a crazy concept that much of our payroll is going to and it really just comes down to the ratios. Just maintaining group sizes, ratios, staying in compliance is what's taking up that 70%. The other thing I want to mention on that is most of us do not offer benefits. So this isn't like insurance cost. At that 70%, you're not usually seeing benefits being offered to employees. The only type of benefits is maybe a discount on their childcare or different things that are out of the box, like me going and finding groceries for my center. Those are usually the only type of benefits that we can afford to offer. I also want to point out that our high costs are not because we pay well. We don't pay well. The average childcare teacher in Nevada makes less than $28,000 a year. Just imagine that. Less than $28,000 a year. That's it. And that's why it's hard for us to recruit and retain. And this also leads to a unique challenge that I've discovered as an owner of a childcare center. Because of this low wages, it really does actually affect the EQ of the people that we end up hiring. Usually the people that are in our hiring pool, they usually don't have an education background. There's a little bit of a struggle. I love to mentor people in this industry. So one of my passions is finding those people who have been struggling, but they're super smart, they just need a chance. And then we bring them in and we help them. We teach them how to be great employees. We help them get an education. But the problem with that is they leave, right? Once you give someone an education, they're not going to stay in a job for $28,000 a year. They're just not. So I know as a mentor, I go in knowing I'm going to lose this person, but that's okay. I'm helping make somebody's life better. So the people who do stay in the industry, though, usually, if you think about it, most people who are capable, they are going to do better for their lives. So the people who stay and they're happy with $28,000 a year, I don't know if anyone's happy with it, but the ones who settle for that, it's usually because they do have a lower EQ, which is kind of hard to talk about in our industry, and it's not something we really address, but it might be something we need to start talking about and bringing up. The average turnover rate in childcare centers is huge too. When you are dealing with a workforce that is making only $28,000 a year, you do see huge turnover, huge turnover. It is really hard to retain. 6 months is the average. My average is actually a lot better, but I've really worked on creative ways to overcome that. My average right now is about 7 years, but that is really unheard of in my industry. And I target a specific type of employee that I've gotten very good at over the last 20 years in order to retain. And to be honest, usually it's women whose husbands make enough that they don't have to worry about it. That's honestly the only way we've been able to really retain. And I just empowering them to give them an education, and they know that if they work for me, they're going to be empowered. We're going to try and find management positions. We're going to try to help them, and they know my heart, and they know that if they stick with me, I will stick with them and do everything I can for them. But without that heart piece, it is really hard to retain in this industry. And having a workforce that is turning over every 6 months is extremely expensive. It's leading to constant new hire trainings, initial trainings, all the fees that come with hiring new employees, which is like every employee of ours has to have a tuberculosis test, a full FBI background check, and 24 hours of training within the first 90 days. That is expensive for a childcare center to pay for. And at the same time, we have to, otherwise we're not going to attract employees. So when you're constantly doing this 6 months, and for me, I have 20 employees, that's a lot. And if the average center is dealing with that, it's a lot of money. So the high staff turnover does have a huge impact. What it can turn into in this inconsistency of care. So as a business coach, one of the biggest things I try to help my clients with is, how are we going to fix this? What creative ways that aren't going to cost you money are we going to do to help you retain your staff? Because it really, that lack of continuity, the consistency for the teachers and the parents, it can really be stressful for parents and the children. And it really disrupts those natural occurrences, and the inconsistency can be very stressful for administrators in childcare, for parents, and it causes a lot of stress for the children. So it's really important for us to help with staff turnover. And not to mention the fact that it's extremely expensive for our childcare centers to constantly be hiring. So building trusted personalized service, it can actually hurt us in building trust, right? Because parents don't understand what we're struggling with behind the scenes. All they see is turnover. They don't understand all of the hurdles I just explained to you. They're just seeing, oh, this person's gone again. They have someone new. So the perception can be pretty negative. Every parent wants to know that their child is being cared for to the best of their ability and that their child is being prioritized. So imagine what it feels like to parents where they're seeing a new face all the time. That can be very stressful, very stressful. And emotional development, to me, is the most important thing in the world. If you look at the United States as a whole, we are falling way behind in education worldwide. But if you look at the best countries for education in the world, like Finland and Sweden, they are prioritizing social emotional learning. That is their number one priority. And ironically, their children are outperforming ours by leaps and bounds. So emotional development is so very important to our future. And nurturing relationships is how we're going to do this. That is how children at this age learn. And you cannot do that without retaining employees. They need that stability. They need the nurturing. They need to build those strong relationships. It is vitally important to the children. So that's where like this high staff turnover is affecting so much, and it is trickling down. It's trickling down to the current workforce and it's trickling down to the future workforce. So the price of childcare, let's talk about that a little bit. Families currently pay 18% of their income, which when I found that statistic, I was just shocked. I just was like, wow, what I can't imagine. And that's the average. Imagine a low-income family. For some of them, this can be as high as 70%. Like for my teachers who are making $28,000 a year, could they really afford that? There's no way. So balancing tuition costs and operation costs for a center owner becomes really difficult. Just yesterday, I was working with a center owner who was in huge distress. She came to me in tears. She asked me if I could jump on Zoom. And this was a center owner out of Las Vegas. So I jumped on Zoom with her to see what I could do. And she told me about one of her families, single mom, working in Las Vegas, and she got evicted from her home. She left everything behind, didn't know what to do. Now she's homeless. And she has to get to work. She's living in a hotel. She has to get to work. So she goes to the center owner and says, I can't pay my bill. What does the center owner do? When you have this child at your doorstep, this mother who is telling you she's homeless and living in a motel right now, how do you enforce somebody to pay their bill in that situation? Those are the kind of things that we deal with on a daily basis that make it so hard for us to sustain our business. And those are the kind of things where, as a business owner, sometimes we have to do the hard thing and just say no. But the emotional toll it takes on us it doesn't go away. Just because sometimes we make these business decisions, it takes quite the emotional toll. And I can tell you from experience, it's not usually a one-time thing. Like usually, I know I've been in the same type of situation before. And in my case, there was a family living in a storage unit. So how do you say no to letting this child into your center where you know that they're eating, where we can make sure that we're feeding them at least a couple meals a day, making sure we clean them as much as we can? Now, there does come a point where months and months go by where we have to do something. But I can tell you, when we do, we lose a lot of sleep. We lose a lot of sleep over turning out a family because they couldn't afford care. So because of that, it's also very hard to raise our rates. Right? If I know outside business people can come in, they can do a cost analysis on my business, and they're going to come in and tell me, you need to raise your rates by at least $30 a week. But when you put the human side in there, can I really? And that is one of the biggest struggles that we face in childcare. And when I created this slide, insurance costs has risen 100%, right? But since I created the slide, I got an email stating that my insurance costs were going up again substantially, almost $200 a month. So now I'm at about 120%. So these are the kind of things that we're dealing with on a daily basis that make it so we cannot run these businesses like a normal business. This isn't like another brick and mortar business. These are people we're dealing with and real life family situations. So it just becomes extremely difficult to balance this and think of it in the same way that you would think of normal supply chains. To me, the most important thing is that nurturing and developing children, these young minds, it requires consistency. It requires personalized care, and emotional engagement is the most important thing. You cannot automate or scale childcare like an assembly line. You cannot. These are human children we're dealing with, and they deserve emotional engagement and nurturing care. Childcare is a human-centric industry, and that will never change. It should never change. It makes me think of the movie WALL-E, where people aren't with each other anymore. And the thought of childcare not being human-centric just makes me wonder, what on earth would the future of this nation look like? And there's AI. I have AI in my center that is doing a lot. It is automating a lot so that my teachers can spend a lot more time with their children, right? But the AI that is helping us to save time, what it's really doing is it's ensuring that we get to nurture the children more, that we get to do more for the children. It's not saving me on payroll. It's not saving me from a lot of those other things. All it's doing for me is it's helping me to make sure I'm giving more back to the children. So yes, AI is making things easier for us. And yes, there are some things that we can streamline. But bottom line is the most important thing. And that is when a teacher is on the floor playing with a child or holding a baby and rocking them, instead of sticking them in a contraption and leaving them by themselves. Bottom line is that is what's truly important in this industry. And that takes people. And that takes ratios and group sizes that are lower. And there's no way that you can optimize any kind of normal business system that would be normal in another industry when it comes to children. So childcare center must prioritize quality over quantity. We must prioritize quality over the bottom line. Otherwise, and I say this all the time, no matter who I'm speaking in front of, I've spoken to crowds of 2,000 leaders, and I don't care. The children have to come first. They have to be before the bottom line. They have to be number one, and they deserve more. We're shaping 90% of the human brain. I often think to myself about the fact that these children are the ones that are going to be creating our future legislation. And the better job I do caring for them and making sure that my center is the best possible place for these children to grow up and the best place where they can develop that 90% of their brain, the better future I am creating for myself and for my own personal children. Because I know the better job I do, the more equipped they're going to be when it comes time for me to retire and be done, and they're calling the shots for my life. I mean, just turn on the news right now, and we can see a world right now that didn't have the best early care and education. And we can change all that through early childhood education. But it isn't something that you can just treat like a normal business. This is child-centered, and they're so much more important than just streamlining. So I teach on these type of things all the time. If you want more information, there's my link tree. You can scan and get a hold of me. I'm more than happy to speak on this for anybody. I speak all over the country on it, but I would love to discuss any questions, clarifications that you guys have, or Kim, if you have any questions, or I would love to do a discussion. I think the discussion part is where most of the learning actually happens.
Right. Well, thank you, Evelyn. Thanks for the presentation and your dedication to the childcare industry. I learned so much. It's very eye-opening. To me, it's crazy how many barriers are in place and how complicated this business is. So thank you very, very much.
No problem.
It's definitely more passion driven when you're only making 1 to 5%.
Yeah, absolutely. It's yes. And one thing I would like to say too is we are coming up. I am part of an incubator right now where we're coming up with additional revenue streams. One of the biggest issues for Child Care Center that we don't talk about is most companies and most business people know that you have to have at least 5 streams of income. Well, Child Care Centers have 1. We have our tuition. That's it. We have 1 stream of income. Because of heavy regulations, it is extremely difficult to bring in more streams of income, right? We're very heavily regulated, and it's something I've actually contracted business leaders around the world, and I work with some of the top leaders in the world, like Fortune 100 leaders, in order to come up with solutions on how can we bring more streams of income into childcare. And what we find is as we try and think, okay, let's do this, there's a regulation that hampers it. And so it's very difficult for us to bring in multiple streams of income. So what I want everyone to know out there is we are thinking about these things, right? I know that a really business-minded person, the first thing they're going to say is, well, why don't you guys bring in more income streams? Why don't you try this? We're doing all of this. And we're still in like a lot of beta testing, and there's a lot of, I have to say, there's a lot more that isn't working because of regulations than what is working. But we're trying to find solutions that are totally outside the box. I know one owner in Connecticut who got an entire apartment complex donated for her teachers to live in, and so that they could get free rent. So there are a lot of us out there who are trying very outside the box things, who aren't waiting, honestly, for someone to come save us, but regulations do make it difficult.
Wonderful. I don't see any questions in the chat so far. So I think kind of, I know you talked about this, but I always find it interesting on like that balancing act, right? Like you need to increase your tuition, but you can't because you'll lose people. Do you have anything else to share on that? You know, kind of that balancing act. How much do you push it? How much do you pull it back?
Yeah. So for me personally, I really look at, I just need to break even. I own enough companies that I don't need to turn a profit at my center. So I'm okay with that. But as a business advisor, if I were advising another business owner and their income relied on their childcare center, there's times where we have no choice. We have to raise our rates. I was faced with this last year, I believe it was, where I had to give my teachers raises. My teachers were making minimum wage. And right now you can't survive on minimum wage. There's just no way. So I had to figure out a way, and I was looking at, okay, I need to get them at least a $3 an hour raise. After everything was said and done, I ended up having to raise my rates by about $15 a week. Now that's a lot. Normally for us in childcare, we try to only do $5 a week, no more than that. So this was a huge stretch for me, and I did it. And I basically we did so much for the parents. They were just like, okay, what do you guys think? One family came to me finally, and I said, okay, just be honest with me. How is this affecting you? What do you think? And she just said, you know what? This is just everything around us. We are so used to everything around us getting so incredibly expensive. And it's so hard to live right now that this is just one more thing. We get why you have to do it. And what else are we going to do? Where else are we going to go? We have to work. We have no choice. And that's just really, it made me sad to have to do that. Now I have a client that I had to advise her to raise her rates by $30 a week. Yeah, $30 a week. And that was very hard. But at the same time, she was facing bankruptcy. Her center wouldn't exist anymore. In her case, she did lose families that could not afford it, and she had to replace them with families that could. So I think one of my biggest fears for our industry is that what we're seeing a lot of times is the families that can afford the care, we're seeing that we're kind of almost pushing out a whole class of people. And it's really the middle class. And what I know a lot will be thinking is, well, why don't they just get subsidy payments? You have to be at about 200% of poverty to qualify for a lot of these different subsidies. And I work with a lot of subsidy programs, and 200% of poverty. Think about that. So your average middle class family does not qualify. I've had moms working at Jack in the Box. Single moms at Jack in the Box denied because they made too much money. And so just think about that. We're basically, it's that middle class right now that's being pushed out of being able to afford childcare. And we're almost seeing it just, I don't know, the really successful childcare centers I do work for that are turning good profits are usually catering to the elite, people who are making and well over probably well over 150,000 a year, which is less than 10% of the population. So that's, I think, one of my fears right now is we're seeing our industry becoming almost like more for the elite.
I mean, that equates to why we're seeing parents opt out of the workforce also, right? Because they just can't afford it. They've been placed out.
They have no choice. Yeah.
Difficult decision.
Yeah, and the other thing I see a lot of that should scare everybody is like here in my county, I'm in Lyon County, and I work with licensing a lot, and we see a lot of unlicensed childcare homes. And the problem with that is that we're seeing them, they're not the best. I mean, to be honest, if someone has the best interest for a child in their mind, they're going to get licensed. They're gonna do everything it takes to become licensed, right? Those who aren't don't want to go through the hoops, and some of them are hiding things. I know in Urington a couple of years ago, they found a childcare center that was actually a meth lab, and they were using the childcare center as a front to hide the meth lab. So that's just where like we need to do something about this. So the parents who have to work, who can't afford to do anything else, and they're looking for cheap care, that's where they're going, to these unlicensed programs. And they're not getting the best quality, which is why you're having parents not being able to focus at work, and they're not really, or it's inconsistent, and it's really, really affecting the workforce right now.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Evelyn. Appreciate your time and fabulous. And thank you to our audience. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us. Our next webinar series will be on August 28th. I think Patty will be throwing up that slide soon. So if you haven't yet registered, if you could take a moment and complete the registration for August 28th. And then also just a reminder that the Children's Cabinet does offer free consultation. So if your business is interested in that, you can always go to childrenscabinet.org/businesses and find some more information on that free consultation. Or you can also find information about our 3-minute self-assessment to see if you can qualify as a best place for working parents. So before you log off, Patty will be launching a poll for you. So if you could please take that poll before you log off, we would appreciate it. And we will see you at our next seminar on August 28th.